All right, good evening, everybody. We're in Genesis chapter 22 tonight. It's a pretty short chapter, so we're going to work through the whole chapter this evening. It's a very, very important chapter in the Bible, the sacrifice of Isaac. So, if we don't mind, Brad, do you mind to lead us in prayer to get started? All right, we'll go ahead and start by reading the chapter, and then we'll go back through. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer them there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abram rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the third day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place off afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come back to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they both went together. And Isaac said to his father, Abraham, my father. And he said, Here I am, son. He said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told them, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. And Abraham went back and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord Will Provide. As is said to this day, On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, Myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this, and you have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gates of his enemies, and in his offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham lived at Beersheba. Now after these things it was told to Abraham, Behold, Milcah also had borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz the firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Chizid, Hazar, Pilzad, Jolap, and Bilthil. Bilthil fathered Rebekah. These 8 Melchah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. Moreover, his concubine, whose name was Remah, bore Teba, Gamma, Talhash, and Malchah. All right. So, what do you guys? I want to hear what your initial thoughts about this chapter is. What's requested of Abraham before we get started? It's kind of troubling in some ways when you don't really understand it. If you don't understand this whole story of this journey of Abraham, do you think this is the best place to start? No, no. You need to understand from beginning to end where God has taken him on this 27 years that he's been on this path to reach this point. So, what do you guys think about what God has asked Abraham to do here? Yeah, I'm glad that you're leading right into where I'm heading. So we had discussed earlier when I talked about Noah, um, Abraham. This is the beginning of the promises to the Israelite nation. There is no Israelites in the law of Moses or anything at this point. So they know how to worship God, but Abraham was a Gentile, and he lived in Beersheba, which is in Canaan. And what did the Canaanites do to their children? They sacrificed them. And that was happening in the time of Israel and Judah, but that was a practice that Abraham would have been seeing all around him in his time. So what you're saying leads right into this. Here we have Abraham in a society where this is practiced. Sacrificing your children is just something you do to the different gods. But God calls Abraham. So in a weird sense, it's God is testing Abraham, but Abraham is also, is this really the God that is going to ask me to sacrifice my sons like these other gods? So it's a really interesting chapter, and it's really deep, and there's lots of stuff we could discuss. Yeah, go ahead, sir. It took hard to do what Abraham was fixing to have to do for sure. All right, so I was going to just take a quick look at further into the future of the Israelites, but how they got involved in this child sacrifice in this polytheistic world that Abraham is coming from. In Ezekiel chapter 23, in verse 39, it says, "On the same day they slaughtered their sons for their idols. They came to my sanctuary to desecrate it. This is what they've done in the middle of my house." So if I'm reading that correctly, they offered their sons to one god in the morning and then went and tried to worship God in the afternoon. That's how demented society had gotten at that point. So, and then in other cases, Canaanite practice of idol worship took over God altogether. In 2 Kings chapter 17, it said, "They did not pay attention and were as stubborn as their ancestors who had not trusted the Lord their God. They rejected his rules, the covenant he had made with their ancestors, and the laws he had commanded them to obey. They paid allegiance to worthless idols, and so became worthless to the Lord. They copied the practice of the surrounding nations in blatant disregard of God's command. They abandoned all the commandments of the Lord their God. They made 2 metal calves and an Asherah pole, bowed down to all the stars of the sky, and worshipped Baals. They passed their sons and daughters through the fire and practiced divination and omen reading. They committed themselves to doing evil in the sight of the Lord and made him angry. King Ahaz, we talked about Manasseh last week. Both of them sacrificed their children to idols. Israelite kings sacrificing their children to idols. And then you have other instances where the people stood by and did nothing, but they knew this was happening. In Leviticus chapter 20, it says, "If, however, the people of the land shut their eyes to that man when he gives some of his children to Moloch, so that they do not put him to death, I myself will set my face against that man and his clan. I will cut off from the midst of the people both him and all who follow him in spiritual prostitution, committing prostitution by worshiping Moloch." So this is the kind of society that Abraham is being called out of. And so what I was trying to lead up to this is he's being called out of this, but what is he being called to do? Sacrifice his son. So it seems like this on the surface, it seems like a very kind of cruel thing for God to lead up to this whole thing. I'm going to promise you this son, and it's going to come through Isaac, and then come about that he's going to be sacrificed. So, Abraham is called by God to do this. In chapter 22, Abraham's first response is, "Here am I. Here I am." Has this always been Abraham's response every time God talked to him? No. In fact, Abraham is pretty bold. I mean, I don't know of anybody else that argues with God about how many people, how long for Sodom and Gomorrah. And he also, he's pretty bold. He laughs at God when he tells him that they're going to have him and Sarah both laugh. So both of those things show that there's an intimacy between them, that they have a closeness where Abraham obviously feels like he can question God about, or especially in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah. All the more so when you're asked to sacrifice your son. Do you think Abraham would have piped up here and said, "Okay, hold on, let's talk this over a little bit"? No. Totally different response here. His response is immediate. It doesn't even question it at all. An immediate response. And it says that he arose early in the morning. I highly doubt that he really slept. Yeah, Johnny, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, and that in no way means that Abraham didn't love Ishmael. In fact, he protested then. He wanted Ishmael there in his life, but he had to be sent out. But he's saying the son whom you love. And like I said, that's not to say that he didn't love Ishmael, though. But like Johnny said, this is the calling of God through this son. But I think it's interesting. This is the first place in the Bible that the word love is used. This son whom you love. When you think about the word, the Greek version of the word love, there's like several different meanings. But here you get the idea of the Hebrew word is that it's an action. It's a love that is ongoing between a father and a son, like a mutual love between the two of them. It's a love that Abraham obviously understands is willing to let go of what you love instead of holding it back for yourself. Which me and Jennifer were talking tonight, like, wow, what if we had to do this? It's unbelievable to even think about. Yeah, Gene. Yeah. It says they arose early in the morning and cut the wood. I think it's something to note that he takes these two servants, but do they ever do anything? They don't do anything the entire way except take the trek. He cuts the wood himself. I mean, it's like, put yourselves in this situation early in the morning when your child's in there sleeping, sound asleep, and you're cutting the wood to sacrifice him. And you know that you're going to have to do this. And then, on top of that, you have a 3-day journey to let that sink into your heart and think about it. And the devil tormenting you the whole time to back out of what God's asked you to do. You know, it's a pretty amazing story that develops here. He cuts and gathers the wood, and after 3 days, they reach Mount Moriah. And he tells the servants to hang out here. The boy are going to go further on to a spot that God has assigned. It doesn't say where exactly that spot is, but what eventually ends up happening on Mount Moriah? The temple was built. Jerusalem is built right on the spot where Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son Isaac. What happens in Jerusalem to God's son? Right, this same spot location. Sometimes the way God lines things up for us to narrow in on, to gain a perspective of who he is from how far out he can look at things, is mind-blowing. That he gives Abraham this vision, or this act to do at this very specific location. I have no clue or idea why Jerusalem, why Mount Moriah, but this was the spot, and Abraham obeys. Straight to Mount Moriah they went. So as they're heading up that way, what do you think Isaac's been thinking, mulling over in his mind for a couple days before he finally gets up the nerve to ask? Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir. Absolutely. So there's another word here that's used for the first time when it says that Abraham told his servants to wait. Him and the boy were going to go a little bit further on, and they were going to what? Worship. That's never used anywhere else so far in the Bible. Essentially, it just means to bow down. There hadn't been any commands of how to do specific worship to God, but what did Abraham know enough to do? Be reverent before God and who God was, right? And obey him in faith. So the Hebrew word for worship there is shashla. I can't even say it. Shash, which is translated worship. It means to bow down, to submit one's natural response to one's inward engagement with God. It's a way of showing respect and honoring others. In ancient times, people would bring gifts, sacrifices, and such when they appeared to their gods to worship and pray. And then again, Abraham starts to wonder, where is the lamb? Or Isaac starts to wonder, where is the sacrifice? Now, I want to pay special attention to what Abraham says here. He says, God will provide the lamb, right? So how do you think that Abraham, is there anywhere else in the Bible where you can glean that Abraham, this is what he was thinking? All the way up the mountain, he's building this faith that God's going to provide. God's going to provide. And even if he doesn't, what does Abraham believe? What does it say, Keith? Yeah. I'm sorry. I thought you said that, Keith. You sounded like Keith. Yeah. Essentially, it says in Hebrews chapter 11:17 that it says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promise offered up his only begotten son, of whom it is said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. So you're going up the mountain. So had Abraham been promised, obviously Isaac was the promised son. Had he been promised anything else at this point? What, Mike? Yeah, but yes, there we go. Who are those descendants going to come through? Isaac. So as Abraham's heading up the mountain, you got on one hand, either God's a liar because he's told me that through my son all these descendants, or God is going to raise him from the dead, like it says here, or God is going to stop it. That's really the only options you come up. Yeah, Matt.
I think to kind of put a cherry on what you're talking about, as far as we know, at least up to that point in history, there had never been anybody raised from the dead.
Yeah, not that we know of.
I mean, we don't have anything recorded, so.
Yeah, so his faith is completely founded in something.
He knew that God could raise him from the dead. The faith that requires is really hard to wrap my mind around.
Yeah, me too. Who carries the wood up the mountain? Isaac carries the wood. And so you guys are seeing the case we're building here of the parallels, right? Who carries this cross? Jesus. Up the same mountains. Jerusalem. Yeah.
You think that's why it didn't bother him so much, because he had that much faith that he knows that in the end he would provide something?
I don't think I don't read it anywhere in there that he wasn't bothered by this. I don't think that I think I have to read into it maybe just as much as you're reading, saying that there wasn't, but I think any natural father, mother that would have to do this would be emotionally just devastated. I mean, but I think to your point that without his understanding of this, who could do this without having this kind of faith to go into this situation? Somebody else have their hand up? Joe. Yeah. All right. So Isaac carries the wood up the mountain. How old do you guys think Isaac is at this point? Big enough to carry wood, big enough to hike for 3 days. Jonathan, you think he was Jeremiah's size? No. Most people think he was at least 20, late teens, 25. Some people even think that it's even more to the story of the parallels of Jesus, that he was right around the exact same age as Jesus. Yeah, we're going to get there, Gene. Well, I think you can. When he starts asking, where's the sacrifice? I mean, he's looking around, wanting to know, yeah, something's not right here, not the way that this normally goes down. So, let's see here. So, yeah, how old would Abraham have been at this point? About 125? Okay, so you got 30-year-old strapping dude versus 125-year-old. If Isaac would have wanted to get out of this, could he have gotten out of this? Pretty easily, probably. Which is pretty amazing, to your point, Gene. I don't think, up until this point, Isaac had no idea. But think about how quick Isaac had to develop, wrap his mind around the fact, okay, my father's going to sacrifice me here in the next couple hours. You got a couple hours to wrap your mind around that you're fixing to get sacrificed. and let yourself be okay with that and not fight it.
I'm sorry, sir, don't mean.
No, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, my brother's trying to have having to do things like going to church and going ahead. I mean, you gotta go to church for that, but Bible says some say 25, some say 30, some say 19, but if you say what goes to it. But hey, I'm not referring by that word, but yes, he thought that over. Yes, he had that. But my Christian always just wanted to have talking about spiritual mind. I love you guys. That's what I'm doing. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we talk about not being okay having nieces, 4-year-old up to 40-year-old, 18, 17-year-old kid that we're all out there. You guys are so happy about that. I ran. I knew that. He would have to go out. I was just out running. Don't say that to you. Only God knows our heart. We y'all tell the whole story. Young lady, small town, Father, I didn't do it, y'all. I'm sorry, God.
Jim.
As far as we can tell, we're not told. Isaac never resisted in any way.
No, in fact, it says quite the opposite. It says that he allowed him to be tied up. Nobody that was resisting could not be tied up. I mean, you see that on cops all the time. If you're resisting, it makes it difficult, but when they're not, you can tie him up. So Isaac allows this to be happened, and the Canaanite practice of child sacrifice, it was burning them or killing them alive. So something a little bit different here. He's about to be killed before he's offered as a burnt offering. God asked him to be a burnt offering. So what does that mean? What do you think about that? Was God gonna? Did Abraham, when he was thinking in Hebrews that God was gonna resuscitate a body? Not if it had been a burned sacrifice. There'd be nothing left of it. He'd be resuscitating ashes. That's how deep Abraham's faith was. That there wouldn't even be a body left, but God was going to bring his son back to him. So, as he's raising his knife, the angel of the Lord tells him to stop. And it's like one of these like movie scenes. I mean, you can see Abraham dropping the knife and just collapsing on his son in tears. And you don't know what Isaac's, you know he's relieved, but you don't know if he's like, get off me or what, you don't know. But he doesn't have to kill his son. And Abraham renames the place. What does it say that he renames the place? The Lord will provide. All right, we're going to focus in on something here. What did Isaac ask his father earlier? And Abraham said, the Lord will provide. But he also added that he will provide the lamb for sacrifice. Right? So when he renames this place, the Lord will provide, is he talking about the ram? No. If he was, he would have named it the Lord did provide or the Lord has provided. What's he saying? Prophetically, I believe he's saying that the Lord's still going to provide the lamb in the future that's coming. This ram that is caught in the thicket is a substitute for the sacrifice that could be made of your son. Were rams used as sacrifices in the Old Testament? Yeah, they were. And specifically, in one specific case, rams alone were used for the guilt offering. So a ram could be a substitute for a lamb in this case, that the lamb was coming in the future. Abraham said it. The Lord will provide. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Mike.
Thinking about we're people that worship, we sacrifice, we give to the Lord, but there are going to be times when we don't want to give, but we still give. And I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about money ourselves. Amen. There are sacrifices when we call the name that we don't want to make, but because of our devotion to God, our faith in Him, our love for Him. That's what He said to Peter. Do you love me more than He has the same thing with us. There are times it's painful to put that person, that thing, that activity, whatever, on the altar. But if the people of worship, right, we're willing to do even the hard stuff, even the painful things, keep God.
Well, and I think that goes to Johnny's point too. When you narrow in on the very first verse, when God says, "The Son whom you love," in a way, God's saying, "Do you love this Son that I blessed, gave you more than me?" I mean, this is the lineage of my Son is coming through your line. Do you love your Son more than you love me, and are you willing to put that before me? Does somebody else have a hand? Gene. Yeah, I mean that's the goal. Yes, sir. Don't you're fine. So we got about 10 minutes left. I wanted to focus in on some of the parallels between what Abraham was asked to do, Isaac's response to what was going on, and what Jesus did on our behalf. So what immediately pops out to you guys right just with a first read? Hey, that's kind of like what happened to Jesus. Yeah. So how long did it take to get to Mount Moriah from Beersheba? 3 days. It's about 45 miles if you're walking it. I won't be alive when I'm 125, but I couldn't walk 45 miles now. I'll just put it that way. And Abraham's 125 years old and, hiking up mountains. So he wasn't a weak dude, but I still think that that's not to be said that Isaac couldn't have got out of this. What's the next kind of parallel thing that you can kind of see in the story? Johnny? Yeah, and that's the point I was trying to make is that when Abraham says the lamb will be provided, the lamb will be provided. A lamb wasn't provided. A ram was. Lambs and rams ain't the same thing. Johnny, you're a farmer. You know that. But the ram stepped in place just like Jesus did for us as the sacrifice. Mike, do you have your hand? Okay, so Isaac carries the wood. Jesus carries his cross up Mountain Moriah's. In Jerusalem is on Mount Moriah. Did Jesus go willingly? Yeah. Isaac didn't have much time to protest or think about what was happening, but ultimately he came to the decision that I'm going to be obedient to my Father because this is what he's asked me to do, because he's obedient to our Father in heaven. That's wild. If my dad came to me one day and said, I'm going to sacrifice you, I mean, we all would be like, you are nuts. You should be in an insane asylum. One thing, it's interesting though, does Isaac return with Abraham? How do you know that? It doesn't say that he does. I believe it says that the two. Anyway, it's a couple chapters again before Isaac's mentioned when Abraham tries to find him a wife. But and this is purely me just reading into this, but you surely got it from just a human perspective. If your dad just tried to kill you, even if you wrapped your head around what was going on, you might need to be a little bit of space afterwards.
There is obviously a lot of foreshadowing in this account. And it just dawned on me. Their journey was 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord was in the earth for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
That's another foreshadowing.
Yeah. Yanni. Yeah, and we don't know exactly how old Jesus was, but he's pretty close to that, somewhere right in there. But I think one of the most interesting parallels, again, is what Johnny brought up. How is the very first verse of this chapter worded? Your only son, whom you love. Who else is that said about? Jesus.
When you talk about parallels, when you think about Jesus in the garden, Luke 22 and 44, it says, and being in agony, he was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down on the ground. Now, we all know, I mean, we've read that passage many times. We know that. And the Bible does not tell us this, but he was in agony. And the Father, I fully believe that one of the reasons that Jesus had to die on the cross was because that the Father, his love, and we know that he loved his Son. The Bible does not tell us this, but if ever there was a tear shed by God in heaven, it would have been when Jesus was in the garden. It would have been. Now we can look over to Hebrews 5 and verse 7, where it says, in the days of his flesh, he offered up both prayers and supplications with loud crying and tears. So we know Jesus cried at least one time. More than likely he cried many. But he cried to the one that was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his piety, or because of his godly fear. He feared God. I don't believe Isaac feared his dad. He may have, when he was up on him like that, he respected it. He respected the will of his father, just like Jesus did. So when we think about that, that should move us. I mean, that should move us to a greater, I don't have the words for it, but a greater motivation to be faithful.
Yeah, no. Um, so the rest of the chapter, after all this goes down, God reaffirms all the promises to Abraham again. That I wasn't a liar. Your son is still here. You're going to have this line of my son is going to come through you. And it goes on to give a little bit of a genealogy of his brother, which Rebecca comes from, which marries into this family and brings us to our Savior. It's a story that you could study and study and study and study and continue to see parallels between Jesus in here. But we got a couple minutes left. Let me get this one question in. So when you think about the parallels between this story and Jesus, who is Jesus the type of? The ram or Isaac?
You could argue both,
Yeah, you could.
because he is the son of promise, like Isaac was, and also he's the atoning sacrifice for us, like Isaac thought he was going to be, but the ram was substituted for him instead.
I think that's about as good as the answer as you're going to get, because both of them play a part in the same thing. A willing son, willing to be sacrificed, but also a ram that stepped in as a substitute for him. But what happens to us?
Isaac was a substitute, just like animal sacrifices was. The animal sacrifices didn't do away with sin. Jesus was the only one that did that. The animal sacrifices, what did they do? They just rolled that sin forward. They just kept throwing that up. So Isaac was just a stand-in for that.
Yeah, his sin, and Isaac's.
The ram was provided, not sacrificed.
Yeah, and Isaac's sacrifice wouldn't have brought redemption of sins. The ram came in, and a ram could be offered as a guilt offering, a blood offering, but it didn't take away sin because the lamb was still coming. All right, anything else before we close? You're fine.
Easy man, and they just ain't getting ready to take time. After they get him or her, they go to the cross. They deny it. I don't know. They sometimes it's the hard job work to deny myself. But guess what? Because very much Isaac was. Abraham was one too. He denied himself, and you feel like, oh, you still gonna do it, right? You going to connect. I love John 14 and 2. 14 and 14. I read. Now that's today about 15. It's all about if you love him, keep my command. That is the whole duty of serving him, as he said. Keep my call, make sacrifice. You got to run out. They don't care. They don't call in the brother. They don't care nothing about God until they get a command. Nobody say, okay, I'm going to make a man better. Everybody say that, and everybody believes, but we got to start knowing God wants to spread the word. And I be sure now we get home. God people say I was in. I'm pretty good at that. I'm pretty good with my ego. That's sad, but I'm working with it.
One other thing I forgot that was a similarity between Jesus, it's pretty sticks up pretty obviously. What was the ram caught in? Thickets of thorns, right? Where was he caught? His head. Caught by his head in the thorns. The thorns that pierced Jesus' head as well. All right, thanks, guys.